I am Pharaoh. That title, before I could even comprehend life and death, was carved into my very flesh and blood. I am the ruler, the sun that shines above the heads of my people, the Nile that flows through the veins of the entire empire. On the throne, I am hailed as the incarnation of Ra, the mortal hand of Osiris, in this earthly realm. The world sees only the halo of light surrounding me of victories, the structures that pierce the desert sky, the pyramids whose shadows stretch across centuries. But within me, behind the gilded walls of the palace, lies a truth that no one has ever known. Tonight, as I leave these words, I wish to speak it. Not to be forgiven for! A pharaoh does not need the forgiveness of mortals, but to carve the truth into the dust, so that posterity may understand that behind the divine aura there is an abyss into which I have cast myself. From a young age, I lived in the adoring eyes of the multitude. Whenever I took a step, the people prostrated themselves, their faces buried in the sand, none daring to look up. They called me a child of the gods, an immortal among mortals. They feared me, they worshipped me, and they gave me the power of life and death as if it were the natural order. I grew accustomed to submission. I grew accustomed to the cheers of "Long live the Pharaoh." That echoed like waves across the public squares. But deep down, I knew I too was a man. I too had desires. I too had fears. And I too was gnawed at by the shadows in my own heart. The world knows only my official face, the firm leader, the solemn king, the eternal monument. But no one sees the long nights, when the torches in the harem burned bright, when the incense smoke rose like clouds, when I cast aside my crown and let instinct lead the way. Yes, I have lived 2 lives. One life under the sun where I wore the cloak of authority, spoke the words of the gods, and held the destiny of millions in my hands. And one life in the shadows where I drowned in intoxication. Let desire become ritual, and justify pleasure as communion with the gods. Does that sound absurd to you? But it is the truth. The priests had sown a belief in me since I was a child. That pleasure was the path to the divine. That in the entwined breaths, in the scent of skin and strong wine, I could touch immortality. I believed it. I wanted to believe it, for it gave me a reason to descend into depravity while still proclaiming myself divine. In the court, I was the wise pharaoh, delivering decisive judgments. But when night fell, I entered another world. A harem as lavish as paradise, where music and wine flowed, where torchlight painted gold on naked skin, where every desire was met, and no one dared refuse. I once believed I was the absolute ruler, but now, as I look back, I understand. I was the one in chains. Chains not of iron, but of desire. Invisible chains, yet stronger than any shackle. This is not a story of victory, nor of glory. This is the confession of myself, the pharaoh of an empire. I will tell you of my childhood, of how desire was planted, of how I turned the harem into a paradise of debauchery, and then let it consume my soul, day by day. Are you ready? If you have entered this world, remember, there is no turning back. As a child, I was not allowed to play with other children. I lived in cold, stone-paved rooms, where the walls were carved with images of the gods, and light entered through narrow slits, creating solemn golden streaks on the floor. Instead of learning to throw stones, I learned to make offerings. Instead of hearing fairy tales, I listened to ancient hymns chanted day and night. The priests raised me not with affection, but with doctrines. They said, "You are Pharaoh. You are the bridge between the gods and humanity. All your desires are rituals. Every yearning within you bears the mark of divinity." I still remember the scent of incense, sweet and cloying, as if it clung to my throat. During every ceremony, the smoke billowed, twisting around the slow dances of the priestesses. As I sat on my small throne, the priests would whisper, "Do you see? This is the dance of Hathor, goddess of love and pleasure. Pleasure is the language of the gods. When you grow older, you will understand." I did not understand, but that image, the dance, the incense, The urgent beat of the drums was seared into my subconscious like a brand. And then, when the blood in my veins began to surge like the Nile in flood season, those memories became a guiding flame. One day, I asked the old high priest, "Why do you teach me that? Pleasure is the path to the divine?" He smiled, his white beard trembling in the torchlight. "Because the gods gave life to mankind. And pleasure is the bridge that sustains that life. When the Pharaoh indulges, he does not indulge for himself alone, but to maintain the eternal cycle of creation." He bowed, his head low, his voice rumbling. "No one dares to blame the Pharaoh, because divinity resides within him, and he has the right to enjoy everything." That sentence was like a curse. It gave me a key, and with it, I would later open a door to desire that no one could ever close again. Do you know what a child becomes when he is told he is a god? He will believe that everything in life is arranged for him. He will believe that all other people are merely tools, just ants crawling around the sun. And when desire arises, he will never think of boundaries. That was me. I grew up in a golden cage. The cage was brilliant, dazzling, but a cage nonetheless. Outside, the people knelt, calling my name in their thirst for a blessing. Inside, all I heard were chants, drums, music, and the sight of dancers spinning like stars in the sky. Pale hands lifting goblets of wine, eyes half closed beneath a veil of incense smoke. It was all presented as part of a royal education, as if the priests were training me to become a living god. They told me, "Every time you touch pleasure, remember that it is not for you alone. It is the communion of the divine through your physical form." And I believed. I drank in every word, as if it were water from the Nile, sweet but also filled with silt and sand. The day I was officially crowned, the people roared like thunder, but in my heart, the memories of my childhood played on a loop. The incense, the dance, the priests, whispers of sacred pleasure. By then, I could no longer distinguish the line between ritual and desire. And that was the beginning of all tragedy. Do you see? It was not by chance that I turned the harem into a paradise of the flesh. It was not by coincidence that I believed in intoxication, believing that in every embrace and ragged breath, I was drawing closer to the gods. It was all sown when I was just a child, when the priests draped the cloak of sanctity over desire. I once believed I was divine. But in truth, I was just a child, brainwashed from birth, who grew up in a world where sin was called by a beautiful name, ritual. Oh, posterity, when you hear my words, remember this. No pharaoh is truly a god. We are only human, weak and full of desire. The only difference is, we have an entire empire to justify that weakness. And that is the very root of depravity. Do you know which moment marks the turning point of a man's life? It is not the day he is crowned. It is not the day he leads an army into battle. It is the first night he steps into the harem. The night a boy becomes a prisoner of pleasure. I remember it so clearly. That night, the Egyptian sky was like a black cloak adorned with stars. The full moon shone brightly, casting the shadows of the towering obelisks across the square. Inside the palace, incense rose in white wisps, coiling like sacred serpents. The musicians began to pluck the lyre slowly, each note seeming to fall into my heart. I sat on the throne, but my heart was pounding. Yes, a pharaoh, yet trembling like a child. I had never entered that world, but I knew I could not escape it. Then she emerged. She was not like the other beauties, not loud, not ostentatious. Only a thin veil of silk covered her body, as ethereal as the mist upon the Nile. Her long black hair fell freely. Her eyes deep and dark, at once gentle and yet seeming to hold a hidden fire. With every step she took, I felt the drums in my chest beat in time. She did not hurry. She approached me, then stopped, her eyes looking directly into my not. The gaze of a subject before a pharaoh, but of a flame that wished to burn. Do you know the feeling of touching fire? Searing, trembling, wanting to pull back, yet yearning to plunge in. That was the feeling when her hand gently touched mine. My body went rigid, but my heart felt as if it would explode. She spoke not a word, only her eyes, Only a faint smile which to me, at that moment, was more powerful than any sorcerer's spell. The music grew faster, more urgent, like crashing waves. Incense smoke filled the room, so thick that I did not know where I was, in the harem or in a dream. The torches flickered, casting the shadows of two figures merging on the stone wall, stretching long like two rivers joining, endlessly churning. She drew closer, her lips whispering an unintelligible phrase by my ear. I could no longer hear the music, only the beat of my own heart, racing, shattering, and then I let myself drift away. I had thought the first time would be clumsy, but it was not. It was like a ritual, a secret ceremony known only to the gods. Every breath, every heartbeat, every movement blended together, as if we were no longer two people, but a part of the universe itself. The music outside was no longer music. It became the waves, the wind, the prayers of the earth and sky. The flickering flame was no longer just a flame. It became a tiny sun burning in my hands. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, I believed I was touching the divine. When it was all over, I lay there, drenched in sweat, my breathing still uneven. She lay beside me, silent, but her eyes shone as brightly as before. I wanted to say something, but the words caught in my throat. I knew only this. From that night on, I was no longer a free man. I had become a prisoner of a world from which I could never turn back. That was the first time. The fateful night that turned me from a pharaoh into a true human, weak, trembling, and greedy. And from that point on, I embarked upon a path with no escape. Have you ever entered a place where all your senses are so overwhelmed that you can no longer tell what is real and what is a dream? My harem was just such a place. Whenever night fell, my palace blazed like a colossal fire in the silent desert. The torches burned brightly, their light reflecting off the golden walls and the stone columns carved with deities, making everything seem as if it were alive. The sound of drums, lyres, and flutes echoed, mingling with joyous laughter, creating a symphony that never ended. Inside the harem, everything was prepared to make me forget the outside world. Hundreds of beautiful women, chosen from all corners of the empire, draped in silk as thin as mist, danced in circles through the thick clouds of incense. Every step, every wave of a hand was as fluid as the winding Nile, like stars in the night sky dancing as an offering to the sun. I sat at the centauron, a throne draped in red silk, upon a carpet embroidered with gleaming gold. Before me were great jars of wine, flowing like waterfalls, shimmering with a red hue like blood. They poured me one cup after another. I raised it, tasted each drop, and let the cloying sweetness and the fiery spirit spread through my veins. I heard the music swell. I saw the eyes of the women glisten in the torchlight, and in that moment, I believed that I was not just the Pharaoh of Mene, was the god of pleasure. Can you imagine it? An entire, vast harem where every sound, every movement was directed at me. The music was not for art, but for me. The dance was not for joy, but for me. The gazes, the smiles, the breaths, the skin, all of it existed only to surround me, to intoxicate me, to make me believe I was immortal. In those nights, I was no longer the one who bore the heavy crown. I was just a mortal, yet shrouded in glorious light, justified in the belief that the pleasure I indulged in was a sacred ritual. Do you know, I once thought my harem was a paradise. There, the long, lingering notes of the lyre were like a prayer. The urgent beat of the drums was like the heart of the god Seth. The incense smoke rose like clouds, coiling around graceful figures. The scent of wine mingled with flowers, blending with hurried breaths to create an intoxicating fragrance that made one forget everything. I sat at the center, raising my cup, my eyes lost in intoxication. In that light, I no longer saw people. I saw stars dancing around me. I saw the entire universe spinning, as if I were its eternal axis. Some said, the Pharaoh is the son of Ra. But in those nights, I believed I was the embodiment of Hathor, the goddess of pleasure and love. I ruled not only with laws and swords, I ruled with desire, by binding the souls of others in an endless intoxication. Every smile, every dance, every touch, I considered an offering to the divine, and that divinity was me. Time gradually lost its meaning in the harem. Do you know what is left of a man who has been drunk for too long? He loses the concept of day and night. He no longer remembers yesterday, today, or tomorrow. All that remains is an endless vortex of music, wine, laughter, and pleasure. I lived like that, night after night. Every morning, when the sunlight shone through the palace gates, I would don my crown and step out to issue decrees with a solemn face. But only when night fell, when the torches lit the harem, did I feel truly alive. You might call me debauched, but to me, at that time, I believed I was doing what was right. I believed that pleasure was a ritual, a bridge to the divine. I believed that in every embrace, in every thundering beat of the music, I was drawing closer to immortality. However, the truth was far different. What I called paradise was, in reality, just a trap. A gilded trap, woven from desire and illusion, designed to imprison me to the very end. One night, I looked around the harem. The music played, the dancers spun, wine flowed like a stream, smiles blazed like fire. Everything was perfect. But in that moment, a shiver ran down my spine. I suddenly saw it was all false. Every smile was unreal. Every gaze was born of fear and command. Every embrace was not for love, but because I was Pharaoh. In that moment, I saw it clearly. The paradise I thought I had created was, in fact, a prison. And I was its drunken prisoner who believed himself a god, but was in truth just a weak, lost man. Yes, my harem was a paradise. But it was a paradise, a desire paradise that led straight to the abyss. Do you know what it is to be in a state of intoxication from which you never awaken? Not just drunk on wine, not just intoxicated by the scent of flowers, but a drunkenness that has become your very flesh and blood, that has become your every breath. That was my life in those years. At first, the harem was just a diversion, a pleasure to forget the fatigue of ruling. But day by day, it consumed me. One night, 2 nights, 3 nights, until it reached a point where I no longer knew when I was awake and when I was dreaming. The music rose like thunder. The drums beat like the heart of the universe. Pale hands wrapped around me, pulling me into an endless dance. Wine overflowed, red as blood. Incense filled the air, so thick it felt as though I were breathing smoke. In that moment, I forgot the throne, forgot the soldiers, forgot even the people outside. Only pleasure remained. Only laughter, music, and the endless vortex of desire. Do you think I was happy? No. Because the more intoxicated I became, the more I felt myself plunging into an abyss. There were nights I would open my eyes in the midst of the chaotic revelry. Before me were dozens of radiant faces, but they all blurred in the smoke and light. I tried to see, but I no longer saw them as people. I saw distorted figures, like demons dancing around me. The music was no longer soothing, but crashed against my ears like screams. The tight embraces were no longer a comfort, but felt like chains binding my body, pulling me deeper. I once believed that pleasure was a ritual that brought me closer to the gods. But in my intoxication, I did not see the gods. I saw only apparitions. Once, I looked up at the ceiling of the harem. The flickering torchlight cast shadows on the stone columns carved with the likenesses of the gods. But the shadows were twisted, elongated, and they quivered as if mocking me. In a flash, I saw Ra not shining his light, but turning his back on me. I saw Hathor no longer as the goddess of pleasure, but as a terrifying figure, her eyes glaring, her arms raised as if to tear me apart. I panicked. But in that very moment, a soft hand rested on my chest. A whisper echoed in my ear. You are a god. You are immortal. Do not be afraid. And I sank again, drank again, laughed again, danced again. And so it went, night after night. I lived in an endless loop, where intoxication was my day, my night, my entire life. Sometimes I thought I had died, but when I opened my eyes, The torchlight still burned, the music still played, and the figures still spun like immortal stars. I wanted to escape, but whenever sobriety returned, emptiness consumed me. And so I would throw myself back into the haze to forget. Do you know? In those moments, I began to lose my sense of self. I could no longer distinguish between the Pharaoh, the solemn king of the Those two men merged into one, and then shattered. I stood before a bronze mirror and looked into my own eyes, but I did not see myself. I saw a stranger with bloodshot eyes, a twisted smile, an arrogant but empty posture. I was afraid, but I could not turn away. And then I realized that stranger was my true self. One night, I heard a whisper, not from a dancer, not from a musician, but from deep within the shadows. You are not a god. You are merely a slave. That whisper echoed endlessly in my head, drowning out the music and the laughter. I was haunted. But instead of running from it, I sought more wine, more pleasure, to silence that voice. But the more I drank, the more intoxicated I became, the clearer the whisper grew. It was like a serpent coiling around my heart, tightening with every beat. You see, this was my climax. The peak was not the throne, not the victories, but the moment I lost control within my own harem. I thought I was the conqueror, but in reality, I had been conquered. Conquered by desire, by intoxication, by my own weakness. A pharaoh should be the embodiment of raw, strong, wise, a guide for his people. But I, in those endless nights, was merely a flickering shadow in the torchlight, spinning to the music like a hypnotized man. That was when I understood. I had lost myself. You are listening to me? Are you not? If these words still echo after thousands of years, it means I have left a mark, even if only in the dust of history. I am no longer Pharaoh, no longer a god, no longer the man who held the world in his hands. I am just a soul in confession, and perhaps also in self-damnation. The world praises me for my great works, the temples and colossal statues that rise up against time. They say, the Pharaoh is immortal. His works are eternal. But they do not know that behind every one of those stones, my soul was fracturing. Do you know why I built the pyramids to reach the heavens? It was not just to entomb my body. It was because I was afraid. I believed that if I built them high enough, grand enough, then when I died, my soul would not vanish, but would climb that ladder of light and join the gods. But now I understand. No structure can hide the truth. No wall can block the darkness within a man. The pyramids are mighty, but my soul is as fragile as desert sand. You may ask, Pharaoh, why do you confess all this? Why do you, who held more power than any other, humble yourself before posterity? Because I lived my entire life in falsehood. And now that the dust settles upon my chest, I do not wish to die in that falsehood. You see, the pleasure I pursued did not lead me to the gods. It only pushed me into an empty abyss. The power I held did not make me immortal. It only made me lonely! The cheers in the public square, the laughter and the harem of it was real. In truth, I never truly lived. I only existed inside a shell called Pharaoh. You might think this is weakness, but no, this is the truth. And the truth, even if buried by sand for 1,000 years, will live forever. Oh, posterity, if you can hear me, remember this. Do not let desire blind your eyes. Do not let power deceive you into thinking you are immortal. For in the end, we are all just sand. Sand on the desert floor, which the wind will carry away, vanishing without a trace. My last night, I sat in the harem, but there were no more festivities, no music, no dancers. There was only me, a dying torch, and the darkness swallowing everything. I raised a cup, but the wine had lost its taste. I tried to call out Ra's name, but my voice was hoarse. I longed for an embrace, but there was only emptiness around me, and I understood. This is the end. Posterity may remember me as a great pharaoh, but hear me now. I was not great. I was just a weak man, a slave to desire, one who buried himself in darkness. If my words survive, let them be a warning. Because even a pharaoh who was seen as a living god can lose his soul. Now I leave you with one final image. The torch flickers, casting my long shadow on the stone wall. The shadow trembles, blurs, and then vanishes as the flame dies. Only darkness remains. Only silence remains. And that is all.